Good morning and welcome to a new series of webinar or recruitment discussions with Jump. Obviously, after our summer break, we've had a nice little break. We've all been away, rested, etc. But this week, we're starting off with a brand new discussion on: are your consultants undermining your process, and do you know you're getting sabotaged? Really interesting and contentious comment. I've heard quite a lot of recruitment agencies talk as they're coming out of I suppose the recession period, and looking to move forward, that their consultants, maybe some of them aren't all on board and what the problem is. So we're going to have a discussion of that. But first of all, some stats. But today we're going to have a slightly different stats. Today, Jump is 4 years old. So 4 years ago, we kicked off with Jump and started up. And since that time, we have done some pretty big things. So to give some stats of what we've done, we have undertaken 2,299 coaching, mentor, and training sessions. And that's actually now 2,300 because I did one this morning before since I wrote that. So if we've done that, we may have done more. Okay, we've worked with 223 recruitment clients. Our YouTube channel, which we do not subscribe, has had over 23,000 views, over 3,000 hours of viewing. We've only got 278 subscribers, but considering no one knows it's there, that's not a bad effort. So if you want to go find us on YouTube, find us on YouTube from there. We've got 27 partners. I'm not going to mention them all. We've got loads and loads of partners. It's really good. We've delivered, Dave, you like this figure, 237 webinars. Plus today's, because we haven't delivered today's yet, so it'll be 238. We've written 58 blogs, or some of us have written 58 blogs from there. Okay, our website has been viewed 88,000 times, and on average, each person spends a minute on our website. I did wrote this morning on LinkedIn that we've laughed a lot, we've debated, stroked, argued a lot, we've innovated like you wouldn't believe. And I think, as people keep saying, we are the old people of recruitment. But I think as you look at most organisms themselves, the idea of the old people is they pass their knowledge down to the younger people to create a better sort of service and provide. And from there, and that's exactly what we've done. And we still live by our values and our mission, which is to create a world of outstanding leaders who shape the future of modern recruitment. Yep. So the four of us today, congratulations, happy birthday to you all. Let's kick off. So we're all here. So let's kick off with today's first question. Okay. We're talking about, certain consultants undermining your processes. Do you know you're getting sabotaged? The first question is, what are some of the common signs that consultants might be undermining the recruitment process? And how can a business proactively identify these issues?
Shall I kick this off? I mean, I think the signs are always there. For the most part, your own colleagues can spot it. Whenever I've dealt with issues in the past, the people that have known that we have an internal saboteur are their colleagues. The staff themselves are very aware of what's going on around them. Not only is it common knowledge that an individual may not be towing the line and really invested in the business by that individual's co-workers, but the information is all around you. And I always say that you can only really judge an individual's activities by what's actually on the CRM, not what they're actually telling you. The two things often very different, and I would only ever comment on activities based upon what I can really see. So it comes down to the old adage about from a management point of view, you're only as good as the things you can monitor. So I think if you're aware and you're looking at the systems and you're talking to your colleagues and you're keeping your ear to the ground, not least also being very aware of what clients and candidates are saying, then the signs are evident and pretty obvious, I would suggest.
I think they're sometimes obvious, Paul, but I think sometimes they're less obvious. If you don't have a culture where those people who do see and know what's going on the ground feel able to talk about it, to discuss it with their management, then sometimes that can be not quite as obvious as we'd like it to be. So I think we can sometimes go along believing that everything is okay because the information on the ground floor isn't getting to us as leaders. So I think it's really important to keep, however big your business grows, to just keep your culture of open communication and feedback going, and to make sure that you are talking to people at all levels in your business.
Yeah, I think culture's such a huge part of this, because saboteur is a very strong word, isn't it? It makes it sound like there's somebody marauding around the office deliberately doing something wrong, where often it's like a drip, drip, drip effect of a few little things that are missed. And as you said, Paul, what gets managed gets done. And if it's not being managed properly and companies aren't being led properly, this drip drip effect makes it look as if there's a sabotage, when really there isn't. It's just the culture isn't aligned with the service or the values of the owners. So I think you've got to have the right culture, because then you'll pick up if there are issues which then may lead to some sort of sabotage or some sort of negative effect.
So I thought quite long and hard about this question when I wrote it, and I thought, what am I looking for the answers? And we're bringing out the answers that we normally look for. Then I started to think, you hit a point there, Heather, that not everyone is a outwardly pointing saboteur. Okay, that they could be very quietly doing things that have a common effect or a knock-on effect and a ripple effect with others. And I started to think about, some of the senior consultants I know, and some of the clients that I'm working with, and some of the consultants in there that, as we said, refuse point blank to put things on the CRM, or put it in as quick as they can. Don't put great information. Are they sabotaging your processes? Are they hindering your processes? And I think some of those people actually are hindering your processes, because I think we've got to start to think that we're putting new processes in, and as we get more and more into a technological age, these processes have become more and more determined, and you start to think about setting up marketing campaigns, email campaigns, etc. That's all going to be relying on the data that you've been starting to put onto your system. So if people aren't doing those type of things, then they are sabotaging your process. They are undermining your processes. And I think we've got to start to sort of think about that. So a lot of it is culture, but a lot of that culture is led, if your seniors aren't doing that, or the big billers aren't doing that, then other people feel that they don't have to do it either. They feel that if they're not doing it, why should I do it? And that's a bit of a cultural thing, but that's also a bit of a person that's undermining that process and dying that. So I think you've got to start to think that looking around your business, you've got to make sure that everyone's doing the same thing, everyone's treated correctly and doing the right thing. And when you set a process out, that people should then have to follow that process. And sometimes you need to redress that process and correct that process, but that's part of developing the process. That's not part of saying we're just not going to do it. And I think that's the bit that I think is sabotaging, where people are not doing things that we know would help speed the process up, create a faster process, and give you more time. And that's the thing that every recruiter seems to want, is more time. But when they're given a process that maybe give them more time, they fear not to do it and don't want to do it because they think it's technical and things like that. So I think we've got to think about it, not so much about what we talked about, during lockdown, where you've got genuine sabotage in your business. But I think that subliminal saboteur that's out there undermining things needs to be addressed. Who's going to come in there, Paul? But no,
I can't fault what you're saying, Howard. You're absolutely right. There's some self-sabotage stuff going on as well. So I think that comes on to your next question. So I'm not going to go there yet.
Okay. So next question. Let's kick on to that question then. Okay. So why might consultants intentionally or unintentionally sabotage your business recruitment efforts, and what are the underlying motivations behind these behaviours?
I think the key word is behaviors. I think, where we get people whose attitudes are misaligned with our own, it's largely because the values and behaviors don't match our own as a business, as a culture, and in terms of work ethic. Do they do it unintentionally or intentionally? I suppose it is a case-by-case decision. For the most part, I would imagine it's unintentional. But where you have people that are dragging their heels, as you said a moment ago, Howard, they're not aligning themselves with the changes in the business. They're deliberately not doing certain things because they're fearful of them, or they have the attitude that a certain way of working has always worked for them in the past. Why should they change? When you have that misalignment of attitude, you've got to, I think, look back at and think about a number of things. And Heather, I'm sure, is going to come in on this point. One of it would be your own recruitment process. How is it possible that we ended up with a person in the business who really doesn't gel, doesn't jive with what we do as a business, with who we are, what we represent, our values, our behaviors, our goals, and so forth? How did that happen? I think you've got to look at your recruitment process, your onboarding process, and indeed your entire appraisal process to establish why this is occurring. I think the second thing here is to consider, if it's the case that somebody's attitude has changed, that perhaps you had a really good performing individual who for whatever reason has now changed and is not operating or acting in the way you're used to, well, there may be other things, other factors going on here. Maybe some of it's work related, perhaps there are things outside of work as well, influencing that individual's behavior. In any case, allowing it to continue is not the way forward, because that bad attitude or that misaligned attitude can certainly spread to other people and cause other issues. So I think there are a lot of factors involved. A lot of it is cultural, but it's also, as Dave said a moment ago, it's an awful lot to do with our management ability and how we're dealing with ensuring that people are complying with the behaviours and values that we hold dear.
And just to come back to the kind of underlying motivations behind the behaviours, Howard, for me, there are a couple of things really. One is something around fear of change. So how well do people understand what it is we're asking them to do and why we're asking them to do it? Because there is some fear of change. And it's difficult sometimes to get people who have been successful in one way to change, to do things with it, unless they really understand why and what's in it for them. There is sometimes a fear of being found out. So if they're used to being judged in a particular way for a particular set of behaviours, and suddenly you're expecting them to have a different set of behaviours, there's a fear that if I make all of this data available, what's going to happen to the way I'm judged and viewed? And so there's some fear around that. So I think really the underlying motivations are fear of change, fear of being found out. Fear is a big one for me about why people do this. And then sometimes it's because they've checked out, right? They've checked out. We have people in our businesses that have checked out and they just don't want to play, right? So they don't want to change. And I think we have to be honest with ourselves. Sometimes we tolerate people in our business who shouldn't be there anymore.
That's true.
I'm glad you said that, Heather, because that's what I was thinking, is that we, as business owners, we're all proud of what we've achieved and what we do. If you're not an owner, it's often very difficult to get that level of pride and that mindset across all your employee base, because they don't care as much about their business as you do. Some do, and that's wonderful if you can get those people. But I think often, particularly given the age of the employees in recruitment, I think often they do check out. They look for something else. They want something else to do. So they're not deliberately sabotaging your business, but they're just not engaged, or they're actively disengaged in a way that disappoints you. And that's, if your culture is right, you'll find that out. There will be freedom to not be fearful of talking about it, and then you can work out what to do. It's when you don't address it, or when the employee doesn't have the vehicle or facility to say how they're really feeling, to your point, Heather, about fear, that's when the problems sink in, and then it spreads. It becomes a bit more insidious, especially given that most recruitment companies have got less than 10 people. You can't really afford to have that happen.
And your point about checking out is an important point. They've been there a while, potentially. They've checked out psychologically, but they're still turning up and taking the wage. And as you've just said, they're spreading bad feeling and bad vibes around the people that they work alongside, which can be very damaging to the organisation.
So if I link this back to the first question, my view is exactly what you guys have said, but slightly looking at a slightly different sort of viewpoint. That we apply a lot of pressure on people, and we then create the habit around trying to achieve what it is we're trying to achieve. And obviously, when you're saying there, Heather, about the fear of change, you try and change something, and people fear change. Not so much they fear change. I think what they do is they get that hankering going back to the old habit. So going back to the old process, and for them, they find it easy to go back to the process, and therefore they push back constantly rather than pushing forward. And I think that's where management needs to step in and say, we need to drive that forward. And I think there's that, unintentionally, they don't realize they're doing it, but intentionally they might. But then from a management point of view, we're either intentionally not addressing it or unintentionally not addressing it where we should be. So the motivation is about what's coming forward, and should we be motivating people to see further in the distance rather than letting that anchor keep pulling us back. We need to sever the anchor and start to push forward with a better habit. And that goes back to they don't understand, or they haven't got an understanding of what's going out. The fear of being found out and things like that creates a very different pressure, because then they hanker back to what they know rather than what they don't know. And if you go back to sort of all those sort of things, that stupid things that people say, look, look at your New Year's resolution by the 21st of January, most people have stopped that because it's easier to carry on with the old habit than it is to actually push with the new habit. And it's the same thing when you change it, when you change a CRM, etc. All those sort of things, you're changing every habit that you've got, and that's the thing that you've got to look for and how you do that. So the underlying motivation some time might be that they don't have a motivation. The motivation is that they know what works and they're happy to go back. They're not happy with what's moving forward because they can't see that instant nirvana, that instant success, when we know that if that's done for over a period of time, that will become successful. So I think there's a lot to add to that conversation, rather than just, are they sabotaging intentionally or unintentionally? It's, are we allowing them to, and are we then not pushing their habits properly and developing the right habits and keeping them stuck to those habits rather than allowing them to slip back into their old ways, which then causes problems. So moving that question on then, in what way can a business ensure accountability and transparency with consultants to prevent misalignment and internal goals, or with internal goals and procedures? And I think you started to touch on that, Paul, in the last question.
Yeah, I think one of the things, we talked about fear of change just now relative to consultants. And I think one of the issues around allowing people to work in a way that isn't consistent with our behaviors and values and processes is that sometimes, in fact, quite often, management are fearful of approaching that individual, fearful of confronting the individual that is not behaving in the way we wish them to behave, because potentially they're long-serving or they're high billers. Either which way, they're deemed to be not untouchable, but it's a very delicate situation. And sometimes we see people just brushing the problems under the carpet, often for months, even years. And individuals get to stay in those organizations. And when we question why, we're told, well, they earn us a lot of money, we can't afford to lose them. And I can understand that. I think we all understand that. But what are we losing in terms of the issues that they're causing? What are we losing in terms of better profitability from others around them, from better retention? Are we losing people because of the bad spirit that this individual or individuals are giving out? So I think fear is a two-way thing. We can't make reference purely to consultants in this respect. I think people are very often fearful of confronting the individuals that aren't behaving in the way they would like to see them behave. And I think, come back to your question, Howard, in what ways can businesses ensure accountability and transparency? I think the key word is transparency. I think we've got to be prepared to have open conversations with our people. And as Heather said correctly, we have a culture where people feel free to speak, feel free to talk to management, not fearing consequences, that we have an open environment. But it is about accountability, and that comes down to constant daily, weekly, monthly conversations about performance. I said at the beginning that we can see their productivity. It's clear, it's recorded. We know what people are doing on and not doing. We're not basing conversations on emotion, we're basing them on fact. We've got comparables between individuals and others in the business and so forth. And I think it is about that transparency that should pervade the business, both in terms of communication and in terms of performance. And when you have that, then you are able to have open and frank and decent conversations with people when they're performing well as when they're not particularly bought into what's going on.
I love this question, Howard. Sorry, Dave, go on.
No, go on, thanks. Go.
So I love the question, Howard, because the answer is in the question, right? So we have to have accountability and transparency. So you've got to build internal goals and processes that allow for accountability and transparency.
Exactly.
So it's all about how you implement these things and what's important to you, and which comes back to values again, isn't it? So if we think accountability and transparency is important, we build that into all our goals and our processes and our measurement systems and our feedback systems, because we believe that accountability and transparency is important. But boy, is it. Yeah. So it's not being afraid to have those conversations, as Paul said, about accountability and transparency. What matters? What we're measuring? What are the things that matter to our organisation? Which comes back to values. It's a bit cyclical. So I love the question. I think you've answered it in the question.
I think it's especially true, this alignment, when I forget the exact figure, but about 40% of recruitment people spend some of their job working from home. So the culture that we build up in the office isn't always there when a lot of them are working from home, maybe 2 days a week. So the alignment thing is really important because you can't physically see them. They're measured by tech, and talent trumps tech every day. You can have the best tech in the world, but if you haven't got the talent to either implement it, use it well, deliver, it doesn't matter. So I think it's important that you have alignment. It's a good check-in, for everybody on this call, and it includes us as well, of course, is to check: are we aligned? Are the people that work alongside us, are they aligned if we're owning the business? Are they aligned with our values? And if not, and there's something else there, there's a learning opportunity. There's a discussion opportunity, which hopefully will pick up anything that may lead to a worse behaviour a bit further down the line.
So I think that leads me to sort of finish this conversation off in a very simple way, is that the most influential people in your business is your management line. And if your management line haven't got accountability and transparency with the lines below that, then there's always going to be misalignment. And I always think about this when I'm sort of doing management training. I always ask, the managers about their gut feeling. And I always talk about, how often have you sat in a one-to-one with a consultant and you've asked them to do something, as they're walking out the door, your gut feeling is shouting at you going, they're never going to do that, you're never going to do that, you're never going to do that. And yet you let them go out the door, and then a month later you come in and have the next meeting and the person goes, oh, I didn't do that. And you go, I knew you wouldn't do that. I knew you wouldn't do it. Well, if you knew that a month ago and your gut feeling, you didn't follow that gut feeling, you didn't follow it up and find out what was going to set the problem, then that's the problem. So I think when we talk about some of these unintentional and intentional saboteurs, I think a lot of it is caused mainly by the management team not being aligned to the goals, not aligning everybody else, and not allowing accountability and transparency to actually run through, and not following up on their gut feelings because of what Paul said at the beginning, that fear. The fear of following up on that feeling, the fear of doing that type of thing. And I think if we've got to outcast that and then say, right, if I did follow up on those things, what sort of results would I get? Because it might change the whole dynamics of the culture and bind people into more alignment, and therefore create a better environment to work in and move forward from. So I think it's all down to the management, and yet we put the blame on the people rather than looking at ourselves from a management point of view. And that's the bit that I learned very sort of early on in management, that, if people are leaving or people are sabotaging the business, don't blame the people. Look at your process and look at the manager. What are you doing to change that? And I think that was my big view. So that leads to an interesting question. Okay, now I wrote this actually with Heather in mind. Okay, how can a business effectively address the blind spots of their recruitment strategies, especially when consultants may not always act in the company's best interest?
Good job I turned up today then, Howard.
Yeah,
it is. I'd have just changed it. I wrote this for Paul or Dave. I'd have just changed it. I'd have just made it up then.
It's interesting because I'm assuming the question you're talking about recruitment strategies as in how we bring people into our organisations, right? As opposed to how our consultants are recruiting for our clients.
I'm talking about both strategies: the strategies to deliver recruitment to our clients outside, and the strategy to bring people in, because that's what it's about. Active with the best company's interest at heart, bring the right people in, the best interest, but also then deliver your strategies to your clients' best interest, because you'll be probably dealing with more people that are not delivering the strategies to the clients, but that's probably will come from not having the best recruitment strategy in the first place.
Yeah. And my biggest bugbear actually with recruitment businesses and the recruitment businesses I have dealt with in my career, and not necessarily the ones I deal with now, but my biggest bugbear is that we do not put, as an industry, enough care into how we recruit people into our industry. So I just think we could be so much better at it. And it's almost like it's just something we do as a side thought, right? Whereas getting the right people to do the right jobs is so core to the then strategy of being able to deliver recruitment services to our clients. So if we don't understand what recruitment services we want to deliver to our clients and in what way and how that's evolving and how things are changing and evolving, how do we know who to bring into the organization, and how do we make those decisions? You know, we should be spending so much more time thinking about who do we want to bring into the organization and what does good look like in that context. And I've seen so many half-assed, excuse my language, recruitment strategies in businesses, in recruitment businesses that have no real thought about what success looks like.
Yeah.
How people get there.
I'm calling HR for that blasphemy.
This is what they'll go. They go la la la.
I feel very offended by that comment.
Isn't it true, Heather, that most recruitment companies have a worse retention rate than the clients in which they serve?
Yeah, really.
And it's always been that way, and there should be no excuse for it.
That's true.
I've spoken to recruitment leaders who are overjoyed when they get their turnover of trainees down to sort of 40%, and I'm like, what?
I know.
Really? So I think we've become so inured to the appalling turnover that we have in our industry. We sort of accept it. Well, that's just recruitment. No, it's not. It's because we make really poor decisions about who we allow into our industry and into our businesses.
Yeah, you're so right. Sorry, Dave, you first.
I was just saying, I just think it's interesting. My son's 17. He's taking driving lessons, and he got asked by his instructor a few weeks ago, "Watch out for your blind spot." To which he said, "What's a blind spot?" And she explained to him what he had to do, and he had to move because he couldn't see what he couldn't see. He had to physically move either the car or his head so he could see what was coming or overtaking him, or whatever the context was. And that's exactly the same for us. We don't always know where the blind spots are, but at the moment we think we've got one, we have to move, we have to change. Part of the reason why it doesn't work in a lot of recruitment companies is that the leaders just don't change. They don't move, or they would rather push it under the carpet and hope it goes away.
And this is one where the gut doesn't work, right? This is so Howard's gut. I completely agree with you on that management instinct about, if somebody's not going to do something, your gut tells you follow it up. The one place we should not be using our gut instinct is about who we recruit into the business. We need much stronger evidence than our guts. I've seen some just truly appalling examples of using gut to recruit people into business.
And I mean, just to pick up on a couple of points here, Dave, I mean, you make a great point. I was thinking the same analogy about driving a car, funny enough, about blind spots. And you literally have to physically move or create some method of seeing that blind spot. Yeah. And it's just a great analogy because obviously, if it's not a blind spot, it's an obvious issue. You can see it. So in business, you've got to be nimble, agile. And I think the answer to the question relates to what you're in business for. And I think what you're in business for, in my humble opinion, and people will scream at me for this, but it's not about, of course it is about profitability, but I believe it's about providing a service that is significantly better than your competitors provide to your clients and employers and candidates, and thrilling your candidates and clients. And I think if you can do that and aim to do that, then if that's the central core of your reason for existence, the profits happen. And if that is the thing you're completely focused on, making sure that your clients and candidates are thrilled with your service. And I'll add a third sort of plank to this, that the people working for you, with you, are equally thrilled at working in the business. If you are aligned with that thought process, then you're going to look for the evidence that you're doing that you're providing an outstanding service to those three parties. And you're going to be asking questions of your clients. You're picking up the phone, you're going to meet clients, you're talking to candidates, you're making sure there are all sorts of vehicles to listen to your staff. And if you're doing that, so it's not an obvious thing, but you're going to look for those clues, because central to your very being is providing this outstanding service. You're going to discover these blind spots. And when you discover them, then you need to do something about them. And I would just make a point just relative to perhaps the last thing about fear. And then it's this, that if you are aware of issues in your business relative to people and you do nothing about it because they're long-serving or they're high performers, what sort of message do you think that sends out to other people in the organization? That you know that the things aren't right, but you're not dealing with them. What do you think other people take away from that message, that people can get away with stuff and not be held to account? Because I think we know the answer to that. And back to Heather's point, I saw a very well-known recruitment trainer at one of the expos not so long ago stand up and say, you need to recruit 2 people to get 1 person to stay with your business. I literally said it in front of about 150 people, and I felt like throwing up, frankly, because I just thought, is that what we've come to? Is that where we're at in our industry? It's that blooming awful that we have to recruit 2 people to find 1 person. What does that say about our ability to recruit accurately, as Heather just said?
So what we're saying is exactly what I see the same thing, but I think the biggest blind spot that we have and that needs to be addressed is A, we need to recruit the right people. B, we need to train the people to deliver what we want to do. But the biggest blind spot is the time it takes to get to that position. And the amount of times that we're removing people. I've just spoken to a client yesterday they've brought in a guy who's got X number of years of recruitment experience. They've got a new person that's come in. They are paying that person an awful lot of money. And within 2 months, they now want to remove the person because they're not billing. And I'm saying, well, how long do you think it takes to get to? Well, they've got experience. It doesn't matter how much experience they've got. You've still got to build from afresh. You've got to build and build and build. And I think that's the bit we have a very blind spot about. We want instant success from everybody that comes to our business, whether they've got experience or not. And we're not prepared to tolerate failure in those first 2 or 3 months, where in fact we should be thinking about our training processes, our onboarding processes, and can we get that person to the end of that 3 months to a break-even point and then move from there. And I think that's our biggest blind spot, which leads to the biggest issue that we have in recruitment, which is retention. And if you start to think about retention, we are lecturing our clients on retention and attraction and according to the stats, and the first stat I always do question, according to the stats, 71% in year 1 retention in recruitment, and overall, according to Perkbox, it's 43%.
Yeah, it's honestly hideous. But actually, there's another blind spot in there, Howard. Sorry, because I know you're about to move on, and I'm aware of time. But the idea that somebody who's a successful consultant somewhere else is automatically going to be successful with us, and therefore we hire people because they've got a track record, without looking at why they were successful, what supported their success, and whether that translates into what's successful in our business and with our clients and in our team. So I think there's another blind spot there that it's worth thinking about.
Yeah, and I think that, level with people, work with people to make it work. Proper hiring strategies, proper training programs. It's not one size fits all. It's absolutely right, and that's come from Annette and from Claire. Yeah, and that's absolutely right. Get inside that mindset. So the question that I was going to move on to, what steps should companies take to bring consultants back in line when they veer off course or begin to undermine the process?
This is a lovely one for me, sorry, because and I think the key word here is begin, right? When they begin to veer off process. What I've seen happen and where it goes wrong is where we ignore things. And as Paul said before, sometimes it's because somebody's a high biller, they're a star in our organisation, and so we kind of let things go. And then it comes to a head, and then managers are really scared because they're going to have a big and difficult conversation. Whereas if we're really on this, if we've decided that behaviours are important to us, it should just be part of our normal feedback loop. It's just a normal part of the discussion. It's not a big scary conversation. It's a normal part of everyday behaviour. And so for me, it's being on this stuff in a positive way. It's reinforcing positively the things that we want and we're expecting right at the early stages before it becomes an issue, before it gets anywhere near sabotage.
Yeah, Heather's completely right. I was about to say the same thing. Get in front of it, deal with it immediately. The longer you procrastinate and avoid having a supposed difficult conversation, the harder it is to deal with it. We've got coaching we provide people about dealing with confrontational conversations, and the key point here is get in fast. Try and deal with it before it becomes a big issue, because once it becomes a big issue, it's very difficult to resolve it amicably. So couldn't agree more with that point. And another point here worth making is that lead by example. If you expect people to behave in a certain way, exhibit certain behaviors and certain values, that has to come from the leadership team as well. You can't ask people to behave in a certain way that's inconsistent with the behaviors they witness themselves.
Can I just add in a slight angle to this as well, that I've had several conversations recently with different line managers who are scared of having conversations with people who have veered off course, who are undermining processes, because that person struggles with anxiety. So we know we've got more issues with anxiety in the workforce than we've had in the past, and so they put it off because, well, I know they're anxious and I know it's going to cause them problem. Really putting it off and making it a big conversation is the worst thing you can do where the person that you're dealing with has anxiety. One of the line managers that I dealt with in one of my clients was having exactly this problem, and I said, right, change your style with this person completely. Stop saving everything up for a monthly meeting where you're really scared of throwing all this negative feedback at them. Just every day have conversations about what's gone well and what's gone not so well, and just make it part of a normal conversation. Finish on a high. Never say anything negative on a Friday because they'll overthink it all weekend. But, dealing with overthinkers and then with people with anxiety disorders, it's really helped by just making feedback and keeping them on track part of day-to-day conversation. So, sorry, Paul, you were going to say something.
No, I was just about to say exactly that. Everything you're just saying is completely true. It's about constant communication, isn't it? It's about, as you said, just if you're having... if there are parents on this call, you know that if you have if your child misbehaves, telling the child off 2 days later is just ridiculous because they have no idea what you're talking about. You have to deal with the behavior then at that moment, and if that's good behavior, you tell them how wonderful they are, and if it's not so good, you tell them that it's not acceptable, but you deal with it immediately. And managing people, adults, is not that dissimilar in many respects. I don't wish to be patronizing, but it is a fact.
Dave, you look like you're desperately trying to get in.
No, I was just going to say, I love Claire's comment about working together, because the key thing I picked up from that question was back in line. What does back in line mean? In line often isn't the issue. They're not putting stuff on the CRM. They're antagonistic. That's often not the issue. It's masking what really is going on. Maybe they're just not liking it there. They're not involved in the purpose. And that's the bit that Claire said about working together. I think we have to work together and go back to that point of most recruitment companies have got less than 10 people. If you're leading a recruitment business, you have time in your month to speak to each of your staff intelligently, articulately, over a number of times in a week, to be able to make sure to try to nip these things in the bud, so that back in line, you really understand where, what's going on and why.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? I always think that you have your core values and you set your values out. As soon as someone starts to chip at that infrastructure, it should be addressed straight away. Otherwise, that chip becomes a crack, that crack becomes a crevice, that crevice becomes a ravine, and so on and so on. And I think we're a bit afraid to sometimes address that early doors and straight away. And I think we've got to start to take that on. And that again leads back to having the right people. But I also think that, when human nature is very straightforward. We are absolutely embedded in flight and fight, as a human nature. So as soon as something goes wrong for somebody, that nature kicks in. So you're either going to fly away from something or you're going to fight it. So if you've got a manager who's flying away from it and you've got someone who's fighting it, it's going to cause big problems and get worse and worse. So you've got to address that really early on, because that is human nature. It's not anything other than human nature, is that if someone doesn't like something or doesn't want to do something, then they'll either fight it or they'll walk away from it. And I think we've got to get rid of that fight and flight and start to think, right, we need to challenge it and do something about it. So as soon as someone starts to chip at the infrastructure of the business, the values and the principles of the business, that should be addressed straight away. And that ripple effect then goes across processes and everything, because it's all about creating a better culture for the people to work in as a unit together. So what role does communication and feedback, because that's what we were just talking about then, and communication and feedback play in maintaining healthy relationships between the management team and leaders and consultants? And if it is broken, how do we improve it?
I think Heather could kick that one off, because
I think I've talked a lot on this, frankly. I was going to give somebody else a shot rather than leave.
Well, it's the old adage, isn't it? Communication is not what's said, it's what's understood. And often as leaders, we assume we've communicated our values and our principles and the way we want to run the business and our purpose and all of that good stuff, which matters. But it hasn't been understood. And if it's not understood and there's a bit of a vacuum there, then you can understand why things go wrong. We don't want to be one of those leaders that say things like, I have values and principles, but if you don't like them, I've got other values and principles. We want to have values and principles that we absolutely hold to, and we want to see our leaders live them, and our leaders live them, and then that by osmosis goes across the whole of the company. So I think we need to take time to understand what we've communicated and that has sunk in.
I think that's a great point. I would say, look, open communication is everything in a business. If you run a business where people feel comfortable talking to each other, where you've created a whole range of methods and vehicles for people to voice their opinions and for you to be able to communicate, as you said, Dave, accurately what we're trying to achieve. If you've got that open environment, people love it. But I think the opposite is working in an environment where you don't know what's going on, where you see poor behavior that goes unrivaled, or what's the word I'm looking for? Unchallenged, thank you. And it's a rumor mill, people consistently putting stuff out that isn't accurate and so forth. I mean, it's just toxic, and people don't stay. So open communication is everything. One of the points I think has been made very well today is that we're very good at, as an industry, I wouldn't say lecturing our clients, but advising our clients about what great culture should look like. But in many instances in our industry, we don't see that. We talked earlier about the high attrition rate. And by the way, that's not new. As Howard said at the beginning, we've been around a while, and frankly, attrition rate in recruitment has always been dreadful, always been awful. It hasn't improved. I think it's just as bad as it's always been. I think we've got to look at how we improve our communications, how we improve the status of our cultures within our organizations. And where you see it, you see very successful businesses. It's not a coincidence that great cultures produce brilliant businesses.
I think go back to what you said before, Howard, and also what Claire's said. I love Claire's comments in the chat here. This is about how well you're training your managers and the leaders in your organization. Set an expectation that good communication and feedback, regular feedback, good and bad, is the way managers should behave. They should be trained in how to do that, in the things they find. Some managers find that really easy, some find it less easy. They need support, they need training, they need coaching, so that they understand that, as Claire says, everybody's different. One size fits all is not going to work. You need lots of, as Paul said, lots of different ways of delivering the same message. Because it will go in different ways for different people. And if we don't support our managers in how to do this and how important it is, that not all of them are going to get it.
So I stumbled across this in a bizarre way. as most people know, I'm reasonably dyslexic. And therefore, when I wrote an email out to people, I wasn't sure whether people understood it or not. And so what I started to do was then send an email out, and then I'd ring some of the junior staff to understand whether they got that. And I kept conversations from managers. Why are you ringing the staff and asking if they've got it? Have I not explained? So it's not about that. It's about this. And they suddenly realised that actually I was actually trying to find out whether they understood what the communication was about and how that was delivered. And if they didn't, then I'd deliver it in a different way and change it to make sure people did understand. And it was interesting when my manager started to cotton on to that it is about the understanding of the message, not the message itself, then you get a better result. And I think that's what Dave was sort of getting to straight to the point. It's about understanding the message, not the message itself. So if we have the best message and people understand that message, well, then we're in a far better position. So the first thing is train the managers to give a good message. Second thing is make sure your consultants understand what that message is and what that actually means to them. And once that happens, you've got a far better environment to work in, far better ground, from the ground upwards to work from, and business starts to move forward because everyone's on the same page, everyone's moving in the same direction, everyone's pulling the same things rather than all pulling in different directions. And that is all about understanding of the message, whether that be a process, strategy, behavior, value, etc. Understanding that, because if you think about it, if we just use the word that comes out in recruitment all the time on recruitment websites, we are honest. Everyone has a different understanding what honesty actually means and where that line of honesty actually becomes dishonest, etc., etc., etc. So if you don't understand where that line is, then how are you going to abide by that line? And I think that's the bit, and I think Dave hit it right on the head there. It's all about understanding. So our first one back since the summer holidays. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed it. Annette, thanks for that comment. Culture and your values are the same for everybody, and that is absolutely one of the best comments I've seen for a long time. It's absolutely right. It is the same for everybody. For those who don't know, we've been firing it out quite a lot. We are running 3-day sessions, one in London at St Paul's Cathedral, one at Birmingham, one at Manchester. I did post in the comments, if you want to get into that, click on the link and have a look at that. Next week, we're in a really interesting question about building high-performing teams in the modern culture, because it's very different to what it was 2 or 3 years ago. So we're going to do that next week. So thanks very much. Welcome back, Paul, Dave, and Heather. Happy birthday, and I'll see you all next week.
And you too, Howard. Take care. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Good week, everybody. Thank you.